be going live. Should be going live right now. It says we're live. We're a few seconds in or so.
Okay.
Might be
There it is.
buffering. So you should see something coming up. All right. So you'll see yourself with a 10-second delay on screen, which is all sorts of fun. But I can kind of see
Well, I'm
myself
just gonna pop out.
on
I'm just
this.
gonna pop chat out,
Yeah,
and
you can do that. I think I can re-enable chat without blowing everything up, but we'll see. We should be
so
running
what I've been
a
doing.
smooth stream, but I may have to tweak some of the
It looks
settings.
pretty smooth. On this side.
So it might have some buffering issues. It's telling me that I've got a couple of them, so I'm gonna readjust bit rate and targets and see if I can reduce the frame droppage, because that's part of the fun. All right, so we have.
I'm gonna make it so that I don't have to look at the stream at all because I can have zoom up and
Right, there you go.
So
There you go. So yeah, you'll be able to hear me. So now that we've, I think, got everything up and we have some kind of audio, and it tells me that maybe we've got a good connection going. How are you doing?
all right, man. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I've been testing a new setup here with a different camera, and that I think is pretty crystal clear. So I'm pleased with the quality, but we're still trying to iron out some of the bugs. And I have a lot of fancy stuff going on with this particular stream setup. So lots of stuff I'm playing around with, and OBS, and lots of overlays and text, and of course the StarCraft font, because it's just legit.
It's pretty sweet.
It's just
I
legit.
gotta say.
So it's there's a number of free ones I've actually found that have been really beneficial. So, and I think the stream will get both audio sets. I don't know if it'll be delayed and how to sync that up properly without way more complicated setup that almost requires external audio with built-in delays.
It's almost like you have to have this as a full-time job.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So yeah, since we're doing this and since we're doing some of these other things, it seems like a pretty appropriate time to think about what actually is the appropriateness of some of the DIY PPE.
Yeah,
That's
and I mean the title is everything, right? Just because you can, should you?
yeah,
Right? I mean it's really the heart of it is, and it's not that. So I'd like to just say to start, right? I'm not saying that you can't at home, right? That's not my message here, right?
right.
My thing is you can, but you have to think about what you're doing, okay? And what is your goal, right? Is your goal to actually create PPE, or is your goal to wear a bandana over your mask like it's the old west, right? Like,
Right.
what are you trying to do here?
Right. Yeah, it's a that's a real thing and a real concern, because that's one of the things that I think I have on, which one is it? It's two super fancy transitions there. You'll see the some of the PPE examples here in a second or two on stream, and what 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 starts to happen is people put together these different kinds of packs and probably upsell it on Amazon for outlandishly high prices. There were a bunch of different examples I was looking through just to see kind of how some people are doing this, and how this has been done. There's lots of garbage bag varieties. There's people sewing up masks and things. And as a chemical engineer, I do know a thing or two about this, and one of the things that I can point out is the way that the masks work most effectively actually are the prevention of the sick people uh, actually getting the actually getting people that are already healthy sick. So they're coughing into the mask instead of coughing on other people. That's the most effective strategy here. So
And I think what people need to really think about here, right, is I know there's a CDC has recommended, make sure you wear something, right? And that's it's in a sense, yes, that's better than nothing, but there's a couple of things that come into play, right? And even a standard surgical mask, if you're able to get one of those, not even an N95, right? Just a
Hmm.
standard run of the mill surgical mask. Even if you get one of those, their porosity is roughly, if I'm remembering what I read, like 1 to 50 microns, something like that, in that
Something like
range.
that. That sounds about
And
right.
you're
If it'll
talking about,
load, I have an approximate
mhm,
I think an approximate particle size filter as a function of the fabric type, but I'm not going to try and put it up on screen
yeah.
because it's like a terrible resolution. But I'll take a look and see if I can actually look at that as an individual image because
But I
it's
mean,
interesting.
that's in the world of viruses, that's giant,
Yeah.
right? That's like
Yeah.
enough room for you to
If you're
walk down a hallway, right?
yeah, if
Okay.
it is, if yeah, that's yeah, having actually worked in the nanoscale industry, that is
And
huge,
you're like
absolutely
microns,
huge.
man.
Yeah,
Whew.
that's just absolutely ridiculous. So there's a whole bunch of things that just do not make sense, and so that's one of these things that like there's this plot that I've found with some of the examples here of different materials and what the effectiveness is at filtering 1 micron particles. And the surgical mask is definitely the highest up there, but they're showing, the like the wool scarves and the pillowcases and some of these other things, right? Just all of these different things that are that are being used to show these things like vacuum cleaner bags. So all of these kinds of household items that people are starting to cut up, and I think that's maybe the important thing to really hammer home is understanding that neither one of us are in this place where we're trying to say, hey, tell you what, this is not a serious thing at all. This is something that, it's all a big joke, and everybody should run around like one of the guys, this artist guy, that has been absolutely raked over the coals in the media, and he's like, look man, I'm making a point and it's an important thing to see. um it's just interesting because I don't know that this is a really particularly effective means to cover things. um that's not going to work. So this one is the lettuce. This one is the unmentionable, the plastic water bottle, of course, which just makes you look like something out of Futurama. Is really like you, you you do. This one, the trainer, is I. This one just about took the cake. We'll get to the one that took the cake out of his whole group a little bit later. But the trainer is that is just really something. So
That's pretty nice.
yeah, there's one more that's even better than that I found some examples of DIY, and that's it is important to make sure people are understanding that we're not trying to say this is ridiculous, you shouldn't prepare, etc., etc., etc. Coming from a Christian worldview, Christ taught us some very simple things as he was preparing the disciples for him to leave, right? He said, you're going to need three things. You're going to need your knapsack, you're going to need your coin purse, and you're going to need your sword. And if you don't have a sword, you're going to need to go sell your cloak and buy a sword. That's a little bit strange because this meek and mild Jesus is literally telling people, look, point of fact, you're going to need a means by which to defend yourself. You're going to need a means by which to provide for yourself, and you're going to need a means by which to provide shelter. So you have to be able to provide yourself food, some kind of clothing, and some kind of defense, because I'm leaving you now, and there's going to be a whole lot of stuff coming down the pipeline that you need to pay attention to. And these are the things you're going to need in order to survive what he was describing as this judgment that's coming, what they commonly refer to as the end of the age. And that process is something that we need to understand in its context properly. When we do, we understand that the principle is, hey, when we see bad things on the horizon, and in general, we should probably go back to the lessons of Joseph and realize that we're we've been in 7 years of plenty, more like 10 years of plenty in a lot of ways, but 7 for sure. And so we could be in for some rough years ahead, actually. So preparing for that, taking things seriously, I think is important, but we need to do so in a way that's responsible. So that's one of the things that I wanted to hit on. What are some of the other points that you had thought of in the context of this?
It's really my overall feeling is that if you're going to be doing this, right, do it smart, right? Understand the first thing that we said was this is really more of a measure for somebody who is already sick to not spread this further, right? And that's where this is most effective, to have these do-it-yourself masks.
Mm-hmm.
The particles being attached to your saliva or your breath makes them significantly larger, and then that allows them to be stopped by some of these, surgical masks would be your best bet. But the graph that we showed kind of lays out the hierarchy of what household items are decent at this, right?
Yeah.
If you have it, if you have access to it and you can 3D print polypropylene, then that's probably your best bet.
Yeah.
But
If you
not
could,
everybody has that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. If you could 3D print polypropylene, you would be able to own lots of
Yeah.
stuff right now. Like that's one of those problems that I would love to be able to solve, but I still need to get a couple things orchestrated. I'm still trying to make sure that I've got as clean and clear a broadcast setup as reasonably possible. That's why I'm experimenting with some of the new tech with our first stream, because
Mhm.
why not, right?
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, that's the
yeah,
thing. Like, so for anybody who's stumbling upon this, right? We are. I don't want to say obviously, but this is the first time we're doing this. Okay, and we are doing this for fun because um, we're stuck in our houses, and and this is how you do human contact now in the post COVID-19 world, right?
right.
And so this is something we're just trying to do for fun. Overall, what we're hoping to do is one episode a week where we just kind of take on different topics and give our opinions on them. That's really it. All right.
Yeah.
I would like to say this: people have opinions. Opinions can be wrong, right? They're not always right. I can come on here and say the sky is green, and this is the internet. Nobody's going to stop me from doing that. But for the most part, I would say that we're coming from a place of wanting to inform people, not wanting to um, propagate lies and rumors, right?
Yeah.
And so the two of us tend to do a pretty good deal of research into the topics that we're going to talk about.
That's why we haven't tackled the flat Earth yet, because
No, that's coming.
we need to be ready for when they dig it up,
Well,
the collective
well,
they.
Jesus said that you need your sword, your knapsack, and your coin purse, right? So
Yeah. So we're gotta, we're
that's one of those
sharpening the
topics where
sword
you
for
need
that
your
one.
sword for.
That's right. Because I have been under the impression that that particular community has a large group of people that feels completely ignored by the scientific community. So while I don't represent certainly the entirety of the scientific community, I can at least take a look at their claims from a scientific perspective and
Mhm.
have a conversation other than you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, the earth has always been a globe. They want to know things like, well, if I drop something on earth, why does it always fall straight down anywhere I am?
Yeah. Well, that brings up another interesting
Yeah.
question that we can't tackle tonight, which is which way is down?
Right. That's
So,
right. Yeah,
how do
there's
you know what down is?
right, starting with frame of reference and understanding reference coordinates is above what most of them have considered in the cases that I've seen presented publicly. I'm sure there are a few that have really thought this through, but I want to try and be able to speak to very specific claims and address those individually. So yeah, I think to get back on track here, the favorite out of this particular artist's group uh, was this one, and it likes to switch one of the frames back and forth, but you'll see it here in just a second. Um, Assuming it actually did share. There we go. So a couple of the hotkeys seem to be a little bit sticky, but I'll have to work on how to improve those. Other things that are broken. This one I think it's just amazing. Like it's got a snack built in, which is kind of makes it slightly more tolerable. This particular artist was absolutely raked over the coals and made to apologize. And he sort of did, but I like the way that he apologized in that he sort of said, well, so here's the deal. I put all this together because I wanted people to think and I wanted this to generate reactions. And it generated reactions and caused thinking from a different perspective. That was his objective, and he accomplished it. So, yeah.
As a face mask? That's ridiculous, right?
Right.
Yeah, it is. It is
It
ridiculous,
it is
right?
ridiculous. It is ridiculous,
But
but
it's actually, if you look at the things that he's got there, that probably has the best airtight seal and the best porosity, right? So
it is
it's
it is
probably
a
the better choice than the sneaker.
right.
I just throw
It
that one
is
out there.
it is yes. I think it does beat the trainer. Although I'm sure Nike could come out with a slightly less breathable variant of a shoe. They could just dig up some of their fabrics from the early '90s
One of
and
the
call it good.
things that I read, right, when when researching the do-it-yourself face mask and hazmat suit, right? I found this article on Forbes,
Hmm.
which was really nicely written. Let me see if I can give credit to the author because that's appropriate and something that should be done, right? So it's called "Making an N95 Face Mask for COVID-19 Coronavirus: What You Need to Know," and it's by Bruce Wiley, and it was on Forbes.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's really well laid out, very thoughtful, and gives you, like, if you're going to do this at home, these are the top things that you need to worry about, right? And it's porosity, it's how well are you fitting the mask to your face, right? You need an airtight fit. um you need, it goes over all these things, right? The mask shouldn't suffocate you, obviously, right?
Hmm.
You could make it out of concrete if you wanted, but
Right.
you're not going to be able to breathe, but that would keep
That's
everything out,
it would.
right?
Yeah, that would sort of
um
be a one-way trip. And that's a little bit of an extreme, especially for a virus that has something on the order of in the most extreme case I've seen reported, they still aren't anywhere near even like a 15% death rate from the infected as the denominator. And the
Hmm.
reality is, all of the projections and computer models and other stuff that have been put forward about this topic, they aren't based on saying, hey, we think that we have a really good control number as our starting point, and we're projecting based on, we know there's n 100,000 cases, and we, based on that, we have a such and so conversion rate to showing positive, and then we have this many deaths out of that group. So the unfortunate reality of computer models is the GIGO principle, that garbage in, garbage out. If
Hmm.
you can't establish good reasoning behind what the projections are, you end up with climate change science. And I think that's another topic for another day that we should probably hit on, because that's one that I've spent a bit of time actually looking into, and had the chance to actually question directly a climate change modeler. So um, we'll we'll have to ignore the neighbor who can't find his unlock button because he lost his remote, because
That's a bummer.
YOLO. It's rough. It's
Look,
rough.
when you don't leave your house in 2 weeks, right, you can't be expected to know where those things are.
They don't even
So,
have small children, so there's all kinds of problems there. So I think this guy though is one of my absolute favorites. I mean, he just went big. it's it should work, right? Uh, no, it's this one is rough. So anyway, the fun and entertainment just really doesn't end uh, from some of the really awful things that are going to come out of this. And I found myself much more frustrated than I thought I was going to be when I went to pick up groceries the other day, and I'm sitting there waiting for them to do the pickup thing and bring the groceries out, and there's people walking by, and they're in kitchen gloves, and there was this one particular individual that caught my attention, and he's wearing kitchen gloves and a short sleeve shirt, and he's wearing a Home Depot dust mask, and it's not like he didn't even press the nose piece to
or he
to
has it
clamp
upside down, probably.
around the nose. Like he's literally just like grabbed it out of the box and slapped it on his face, and didn't bother paying attention whether or not it even has minimal coverage. Like, it's clear this guy had never used one of these masks at all. And so what he's done there is, and which one would you guess? Is he wearing shorts or pants?
Well, based on the fact that you said he had a short sleeve shirt on, I'm going to say he's got shorts on.
He was wearing shorts. And
Yeah.
so he's, brushing up against things, and like all kinds of other stuff, and having incidental contact on these surfaces with elbows and legs, probably without noticing. And so, like, those are the kinds of things that it's inconsistent thinking that's been uh created by this unholy panic that's been generated. And so apparently one of the things that our president did recently was kind of a clever chess move. Is, it seems like he now has reason to believe that we actually aren't at all going to have death tolls in the millions, and really, actually, probably this virus has been on the US shores way longer than what people are saying and reporting it is. And when you put all of that together, you then have this idea that there are a lot of people that aren't included in these models that already have immunity, and all of these other things. And so these models are perhaps overblown initially by a full order of magnitude or so. And so now he's able to step out there and claim that, well, I've saved 2 million lives or whatever by doing all these things that we've done. And so I heard it put by one of my favorite pastors that if you know that they're going to run you out of town, then you should probably get out in front of them and make it look like a parade. And so I think he's done a very
Fair.
good job in this regard,
Hmm.
because the modeling aspect, and that was one of the things I wanted to hit on, is the modeling aspect just isn't done in a way that is supportable with high quality data. And that's what the concern comes from, is you're making broad sweeping policies and using emergency powers to do all sorts of things as a result of computer models that aren't necessarily taking all of the important factors into consideration. So when you do that, now he has the ability to say, look at all the lives we've saved, but those lives were not actually statistically likely to be in danger in the first place, right?
Sure.
So it doesn't make logical sense. But now the only way for them to attack him and discredit him for saying that that's a crock of garbage is to say that their own work and predictions and modeling, and therefore all of the education surrounding their modeling processes, is equally garbage and unpredictable.
So with something like this, right, as somebody who dabbles in teaching people how to model things mathematically, right? Um, One of the things that I stress with my students is when you have a mathematical model, it's only as good as all of the information that you have, right? There's no
Mm-hmm.
possible way that you can possibly know all of the variables that go into any model at any
Mm-hmm.
time, right? Now, that being said, I'm sure they have very smart people who are tiers of IQ higher than mine working on this,
I
right?
I
And
would hope they have people smarter than us working on these projects.
I,
Truly.
I I would imagine that these are some of the sharpest minds, right? And they're putting together the best models that they can with the information they have at the time. But this is also an issue of they're running the models as they go, right? And
Yeah.
so they started with an incomplete data set, and they won't have a complete data set until this is all passed, right? And so can they come up to um, can they come up with something that is reasonable, right? That works reasonably well. That's
Mm-hmm.
what they're shooting for. They're not shooting for perfection, right? They're shooting for, are we can at least be in the ballpark,
Yeah.
right? Probably, I would imagine that their tolerance for a ballpark is probably like 2.5 to 5%, somewhere in there.
I would hope so.
Yes.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Um,
And it's the farthest thing from my my desires and hopes that a couple million people die from this. That would be ridiculous, and that would be
right.
a tremendous tragedy for this country. I just presented even to some of our colleagues that have been requesting some other ideas, and how can we, you know, leverage some of these capabilities with 3D printing and things to help assist. And I put up, for instance, an example video that I'm working with one of our other colleagues to help develop some online summer camp activities so that they can get those in front of some of the high school students. It's topically relevant right now. It's an approach using some free software to design a face mask by just way of making a headband that's flexible to be able to fit around kind of an average head size. And there's a bunch of varieties of this already out on the internet. There's a bunch of people already, we're gonna 3D print these in mass, and like we're gonna send them, box them up, and send them out and stuff. all well-intentioned stuff. Like, I absolutely
Hmm.
salute that. But some of the other things that they're talking about, oh, we can 3D print parts for ventilators and like all these other things. And one of the things that I pointed out is I've recently been researching, just because I'm been very heavy in research for a personal 3D printer, and all this knowledge happens to be immediately relevant, so I know way more than most on this particular topic. The way that FDM methods work, they leave these microscopic gaps in between these layers, no matter how fine your resolution is. And even the finer your resolution is, the tighter those gaps become, such that they become really ideal for proteins and proteinaceous biomaterials to be able to stick. Well, that's what viruses are. Is it's a small genetic snip that's coated typically in some combination of proteins and lipids, to kind of disguise it and package it so that it can get into the body, and replicate itself by hijacking the host machinery. They're really devious little suckers. And that's part of the reason why, in certain circumstances, they won't hijack the body that they're using to produce the virus. They'll reproduce and reproduce and reproduce and spread and be contagious without actually affecting the host's health and all kinds of other things. But you know, all different types of viruses are going to react differently. But one of the things that's important there is, because those 3D printed valleys make for ideal attachment sites for those kinds of particles, and then further biocontamination, because cells love to be able to attach to a surface that's already coated with proteins. It's just like a gluey, sticky surface to them, so they can create biofilms. Now you have massive infections that can develop, all because you had a well-intentioned idea to 3D print a part for something that's an infectious virus. And it's because people just, they don't understand the number of things that they don't understand, and that's part of the reason why we do the stuff that we do at a higher learning institution, is to try and bridge the gap for some of those things, right?
Yep. So I think that brings up a really good point, which is goes back to our topic for the night, right? Is if you are going to be doing this in your home, right, doing this yourself, you need to do the research, right? You can't just be slapping things together to see if they work. That's not going to help anybody, right? You need to understand all the things that you can possibly understand about this, right? Like the fact that if you have a virus and you have small microchannels, viruses like to hang out there, right? Like
It's kind of
that
an important thing to
you
know.
should, you're right, you should know that. One of the reasons why 3D printing masks out of um, polypropylene works so well is if you change the direction of the print, you actually are making these long winding passageways that the virus has to travel through, that it's kind of like a maze for it to get through, right?
Yeah.
um, but that's, again, the masks, the N95 mask specifically does not just rely on porosity as its only filtration method, right?
Hmm.
There's redundancy built into that system, and so again, if you're going to be doing this at home, you're going to want more than one way of filtering things, and these things are going to get expensive for you at
Yeah.
home if you want to do it right. That's
Yeah.
just bottom line.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And that's, I think there's a lot of, there are a lot of holes in the well-intentioned ideas. And so, there are a lot of things that you can do. You just have to understand that if you're going to take an approach like that, that probably is going to develop a one-time use product, right?
Hmm.
And so you can probably sterilize it once. After that, you really can. And that's another reason why you can't turn around and safely print things that are going to house, uh, like proteins and other things from different
You
kinds
can't
of
autoclave
food,
it, right?
like yogurts and other stuff. Like, you wouldn't want to 3D print yourself a coffee mug with FDM methods and materials. and stuff like that, especially if you're using sugar in it, because those saccharides can help to trigger some of that initial organic deposition layer that acts like a homing beacon for cells to be able to, or really more like a fly paper is really a better analogy there, more like fly paper to the bacteria and yeast cells. Those are really important to understand kind of how they work and how they operate. So there are some things that you can do, like just making sure to take care of your hygiene and using, instead of trying to track down hand sanitizer and whatever else people are thinking about, developing low concentration bleach solutions and stuff, and incorporating those in some of the cleaners that people aren't buying off the shelves, right? So like one of the ones that we have recently been buying from Costco is the I think they're classified under like aromatherapy cleaners or something.
Okay,
Uh,
I'm listening.
they're they're not a common. They're not the ones that people go to first, because people look at that and they're like, "What? That's not going to do anything." It's
Hmm.
actually a pretty good degreaser because it uses a blend of natural oils and surfactants to help
Hmm.
kind of lift surface grime and debris. So they actually do work as a cleaner, and they happen to smell nice. They're just not full of chemicals that I have to pause to pronounce, right? So that's generally a good sign.
Hmm.
And so I tend to use cleaners like that more often than not, also because I understand that for many types of microorganisms, the oils are really not a good environment for them to grow in, because they can't really
So,
metabolize those.
so
And
are you saying that chemistry is important?
yes, that is important in this circumstance. And now,
Interesting.
oil will not do a, probably much of anything really to this particular virus. Now, if you had highly if you had a highly acidified solution that also contained some oil in emulsions, and you had a lot of capsaicin and things like that, as an oil phase component, probably that would have a pretty good effect at disrupting the lipids that are coding and protecting the genetic information of this virus. Because as soon as you break that shield, it's much more vulnerable to denaturing by contact with a surface, because now it's not protected in its nice little Borg shield,
Hmm.
so to speak. So by adding something like handful of milliliters of bleach to my particular cleaners, because I understand the chemistry involved, and if it's oils, water, and a couple polar phospholipids, it's a soap and oil based cleaner. It's not an aggressive degreaser or anything crazy. There's no reactions to be had there by adding a little
Hmm.
bleach into the solution, and now the happy scent cleaner is an actually serious aggressive surface cleaner. And I after we all kind of got healthy again from having our own spell with this like adenovirus or whatever is going around at the same time, because it often goes around this time of year, where you have a little bit of a cough and you have some other things. It's not the same symptom set as COVID, but these days you cough within 10 feet of people
Oh
and
no,
they
yeah.
hit the
People
deck. It's
they pull their guns that they all bought at a local pawn shop, and
right,
you
right,
see
yeah,
just how Walking Dead everybody's going to be.
right, yeah. I I joke all the time that it's like Book of Eli out there right now. It is seriously crazy. Like I'm gonna watch that movie again just to try and be prepared for what's gonna happen.
My
Um,
sister-in-law actually the other day was like, I guess they took one. I guess on Friday, my wife and my sister-in-law took the kids on a drive, and
yeah,
they saw some police activity. And it turned out that there was a shooting. down the road from us, unfortunately. And but
Yeah,
my sister-in-law told me that she was waiting to see if there was like some sort of zombie thing that was going to be happening.
right.
So and I told
That's
her straight up, I'm like, we're not prepared for that. If that happens, we are like in this
right.
house. I right now I am not ready for full on zombie apocalypse. This is not a
Right.
fact.
Right. There's going to be a lot of people that are in that same category, and that's part of the general level of frustration with some of this stuff is just the number of people that don't have uh, preparation for not just, and that's one of the other topics that I think we should consider trying to hit is the people that aren't just not really prepared for meeting this process if they're, um, the number of Americans living paycheck to paycheck even
Mhm.
is an extremely high percentage, and that's a huge change in the mindset of the US that needs to happen. Among some other things, there's a bunch of really hard lessons that we're going to bring out of this, but I'm genuinely concerned what's going to happen with these people that have been literally just drop kicked because of these government's actions. They've just been drop kicked completely out
Yeah.
of the economy at this point, and that's the thing that causes me the most concern out of any of this. I'm far more concerned about what do we do to rehabilitate and reintegrate those people into the new economy, whatever that looks like, and how do we help them? And that was really one of my challenges that I put forward as that's maybe a thing that we could be focused on instead of the let's try and 3D print some of the stuff to solve some of the medical things, because I am of the perhaps very unpopular opinion, and I don't know if there is an official term yet, called like a virus denier. I understand that there are people dying, and this is a real thing. I also understand that people die of things like respiratory complications every year, and the CDC's numbers from 2018 were like 160,000 approximately. So if 160,000 approximately are dying often year over year from respiratory disorders, we're not shutting down the country because of those, but a lot of those respiratory disorders, some of them are non-communicable. So there's like a level of inconsistency here that's really
So I think
baffling.
there's a couple of things that play into that, right? And first off, it is an election year. So I think that virus hype goes up during an election year, and I think you and I have talked about this before. And there's other places where you can look up the facts here.
True.
But if you look at the last few virus scares that we've had, they've all been in election years, regardless of Democrat or Republican. Right? This
Right.
is just a thing that tends to happen.
Yeah, the
Um,
Ebola one was a huge one.
mhm,
Huge,
yeah.
huge, huge.
Um, so that's playing into this fear a little bit, and I think the part of this is that yes, there is that death toll yearly from similar type viruses and complications, right? But this seems to be happening at such a rapid pace that people um, are fearful because it's happening so fast,
Yeah.
right? And I understand that, right? There's an immediacy here that maybe should have been there to begin with, that wasn't. Now, I'm not saying that we should all never leave our houses, and that's not it's not good and it's not healthy. We're at the end of 2 weeks of being at home, and I'm I personally am at the point where I'm like, okay, this is great. When can I go back outside my house again?
Right.
Right. That's kind of where I'm at.
Right. And I think a
Um,
lot of people are in that space too, and that's part of the reason why we're trying to bring some small degree of sanity and reason for probably the 4 people on planet Earth that'll
Hmm.
actually watch this in the next 10 years, assuming that we still have
Sure.
internet in 10 years.
Well, all right. And so here's the other thing, right? Like, just because you're not supposed to go out in public places and like congregate in large groups doesn't mean you can't do stuff, right? So, like,
Yeah,
my family, we've been taking long, like, we bought a bike trailer, and we've
yeah,
been taking long bike rides with the kids.
there you go.
We don't interact with many other people, but you know, when you have 2 little kids and you tell them, you can't go outside, right?
Right,
Well, you're not going to daycare, right? And mommy and daddy are going to be working from home,
right,
but we can't really interact with you as much as you want because we do have to do work,
right,
right?
right.
How do you manage that, right? And so you've got to you've got to come up with creative solutions. And
Yeah.
um
Well, and in your case, having to have two simultaneously teaching from home
yeah.
is that is just a truly a bizarro universe. Like that's
Yeah.
none of us woke up thinking,
No.
gee,
I thought I
next
was going to
month
have
I'm going to
spring
be a
break.
pro YouTuber,
I,
right?
I was I was real happy. I woke up one day. I thought I was gonna have spring break,
Yeah.
and then I got into my office and
the,
I was told, "No, you're not gonna have spring
defecation
break."
hit
Yeah,
the reciprocating blade. Yes, that's
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 pretty much how it went down. And
yeah,
then
it it is. It is. And it's frustrating because this is a death in particular is a topic that people are so uncomfortable with to begin with that there's a lot of people that are taking this, and I think one of the things that is not being considered, or at least perhaps not as carefully being considered, is this idea that there are some saying, we're gonna love neighbor because Christ knew that we were too stupid to follow 10 simple rules, as my dad often says. So we boiled it down to two,
mhm.
and what that results in is he says, oh, they're asking him what's the most important commandment, and he says, love God, love neighbor as yourself. Um, and those two things, out of all that, he says, come the law and the prophets. And so everything else stems ultimately from that. And one of the things that I had to go back and look up, just because I don't remember all of this off the top of my head, because it's like a table. It's only so big, or the
Mhm.
RAM in a computer. There's only so much of it, and unfortunately, I
But
can't just go
SolidWorks
in there
wants it
and
all the
upgrade.
time.
SolidWorks wants it all the time. You could have all the RAM ever made, and SolidWorks would still gripe about you don't have enough resources. Like I literally want to run an instance of SolidWorks on this machine that I'm running on tonight with different motherboards so that I can stack. I think I can run. Uh, I think I can run something coming up on like 64 gig of RAM actually in this machine with a regular motherboard on this same processor, and just see if SolidWorks still complains. But that would be a very expensive experiment, and I would just get frustrated and want to throw tools across the garage when it still complained. So
Yeah, yeah.
probably not worth it. But this is one of those things that we have an interesting time now that we live in. And so because Christ laid out those things, I went back to see what God's law actually says in regards to this particular topic, because rather than just making crap up myself, I would much rather rely on a consistent source, and that's why I try and refer back to that as much as possible. So one of the things that I found there was in Leviticus 13. It goes through the protocols that are laid out for leprosy. So probably that was a term used to describe, based on the language that's in there, if it's this color or that color, if it looks like this or looks like that or does this thing and it doesn't do this thing, then they're clean or then they're unclean. And so it was all up to the priest to decide what that was based on
Unclean,
these
unclean
laws,
until sunset.
right? And so there was a quarantine period instituted.
Mhm.
It was usually 7 days. The priest would come back and check. And so this whole idea, this whole thing has to work together as one cohesive package. And if it was determined that this person was still unclean after that quarantine period, they would be isolated outside the camp instead. And that's the thing that I think people are not doing right in our country and a lot of the other countries in the world is if you if you are able to test, identify, and quarantine the sick away from the healthy, then you don't have a lot of the problems that we've had. And so that sounds to a lot of the people that are the alarmists right now like you're just, I'm sure the term virus denier is a thing now. If not, it will be soon.
Since
So
the first time you said it on this podcast, it has probably come
it's,
into
it's
the vernacular. So,
probably, but I wasn't the first one to coin that
I mean,
phrase.
this
So
podcast is a huge influencer on a lot of
it
things. So,
it could be. It could be. It says there's three concurrent viewers. So if
yeah,
that's one on my end, one on your end, that's probably
yeah,
all the three. So um, there are a couple things that I learned in there, and the idea is that if we're not doing things that way, we're not doing things according to the way that God's set up. There's a lot of reasons that we should not eat unclean animals and things like that, which
well,
is where a lot of these viruses have mutated from, is by eating a lot of exotic foods in some of these markets in Asia. And so there's a there's a reason that a lot of that has happened. So it's a consequence of a choice that has now endangered lots of others. But people aren't having the discussion of, oh my gosh, in order to save lives, you need to stop eating rats and dogs and cats and whatever else you're eating, right? You need to rethink the way that you're doing things, and maybe we need to try and push the synthetically grown steaks, or whatever, all kinds of things that could be done instead, or we need
mhm.
to really push uh the the advancement of food science in the area of plant-based protein, and there's all kinds of things that could be done in order to reach some of the economic targets and all the other justifications that would be out there for this. Because I don't know that the world is better off for people eating rats or something, right?
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably not. Um,
Like I'm sure there's other options, but that's the thing, is people aren't thinking about that as a possible part of the problem or even a possible part of the conversation. And I'm sure to even dare asking that question instead of just doing what's best for the herd, which is to wash your hands 30 times a day and obey curfew, otherwise you're going to get drone strikes if you're wherever they're literally like following people around with drones and all kinds of stuff now, like complete lunacy
mm,
over this stuff. But people aren't calling for an end to the eating of bizarre exotic foods from which these kind of recurring category of viruses often originate.
yeah. Well, I mean, the yeah, you're right, and that's probably doesn't help. I mean, it's like you said earlier with models, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Same thing with your body, right? You put
Yeah.
garbage in, and you know you're not going to feel well, right? And you're going to get weird foodborne uh, parasites and diseases, and that's not fun for anybody, right? Especially when
Yeah.
that starts to mutate and becomes viral, and entire populations end up having to deal with it.
There's all sorts of problems that comes out of that. So one of the suggestions that I made, because I've been trying to hammer the point recently that as engineers we're very much driven to identify the problem, but everybody can complain about a problem. That's the easiest thing in the world to do, especially to jump on the bandwagon for a problem somebody else already identified. But it's very difficult to solve the solution. So to kind of round out this topic, in the case of something like DIY of something like PPE, if it's a dire circumstance where everybody in your house except you has this virus, exceedingly high likelihood that you also have the virus as a carrier. Um, the notion that you're going to be able to self quarantine within the same house and like some of those things, that I appreciate the efforts there, but realistically, if you've been in the same environment, by the time you actually become symptomatic, it's very likely from a lot of the viral pathology that I've studied for other virus types. By the time that you actually show symptoms and are symptom positive, you've already contributed
Hmm.
gazillions of the virus to the environment. So
Yeah,
at that point you're doing a thing that makes you mentally feel better, but you're probably not actually doing as much as you think you are.
I mean, bottom line here is right. Really, wash your hands, right? Um, stay stay away from overly public places. Make right the whole flatten the curve thing is not, it's not for you. Okay, the whole flatten the curve thing is not for you. What do I mean that it's not for the people who are in the middle range of their life. Okay, children seem to be okay. There are some odd outlier cases where children have contracted this, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
really a socially responsible thing. And if you're watching this and you're an adult, I would say sacrifice 2 to 4 weeks of your entire life, suck it up, stay inside, right? And just live your best quarantine life, okay? Because it's a socially responsible thing. You don't want to be the person that carries this around and infects a lot of other people, who then in turn infect some people who are older, who then
Right.
end up passing because of something that you did,
Right.
right?
And one of the other things that I had heard brought up by my pastor that's not being suggested is the people that are the same exact group of people that are so wound up about, well, you could, unknowingly carry this microorganism to someone else. For you to be judgmental
Hmm.
towards someone else about that, in order to be consistent, you need to be freaked out every single flu season, every single
Yeah.
time,
Well,
because you can, in all of those cases, at any time, you can be a carrier of a thing and be asymptomatic and have no idea. And so to tell people that, oh, you're basically a murderer if you try and like it, just just calling
I
for
mean,
a timeout
yeah.
even.
I mean, bottom line really is be socially responsible. If you think that you're sick, don't go around people.
Yeah, which
Okay,
is a
that's
thing that I did,
mhm.
realizing that I had a a cough right after I had to deforest the backyard, which of course has I've I got all sorts of stuff just absolutely wiping out my sinuses. It was really bad, and I had a cough for about a week over that. And I think my lungs are finally clear. I had to do some stuff in the front yard and pull a bunch of weeds today and do a little bit of work in the back, but I didn't go through and deforest the back again, even though it needs it. I'm actually trying a different approach to it to see if I can uh,
Fire.
essentially just like salt the earth back there, because fire would be great, but that would also require me getting a full size propane tank and then
Controlled
also a
fire.
full size propane burner. And I could easily do that here in this environment, but I also live like a block from a fire substation, so
Yeah.
I'm trying not to get to know them on a first name basis where possible. But there's a lot of other things that can be worked on in a DIY setting, and one of the ones that is of interest to me is this one, and I think this one, if I'm I'll bring it up here on screen. This one is actually uh, based here in Phoenix, Arizona, and this is the kind of group that has already developed something that I think is very much worthwhile. It likes to switch back and forth between my examples. There we go. So the this is a different variety of being able to grow food, and one of the things that can be done in a sort of DIY fashion, and one of the things that I've been impressed to learn about, and something that I'm considering figuring out how to do myself, is something like this. They've already done a lot of development work, so they've got this system that depending on what you're growing, within 1 to 3 weeks, depending on what the plant type is, you can actually have with one or two of these, you can have like a week's worth of vegetables for a family of four. And here in Arizona, things are extremely dry. Most people don't have acres and acres for farmland out here, but a lot of people have a spot like on the back porch or on their balcony, or something. Even a balcony in an apartment would probably have this much space. Most types of balconies that I've seen here in Arizona, even little enclosed patios and stuff, most of them would have a spot big enough for at least one of these, where you could have this kind of an arrangement actually growing. They can also be done inside with a couple of these. There are a few varieties, and they can carry each of these. They need something like 3 square feet or something as the footprint. Maybe it's 4 square feet approximately. Yeah, they're about a 20-inch base and 24-inch base, so about a 4 square foot footing. And you drop these little cups in, and the water doesn't evaporate nearly as quickly, so you end up able to recycle that water, because it waters the plants and then gets pumped back up, and so it has the plant food and everything else already in it. And so you have to water the plant, like you have to add water to that, I don't know, once every week or week and a half, depending on what you're growing and how much of whatever you're growing. You might need to water it a little bit more often, but that is much better in terms of like Arizona, where it's super dry and they've already got all the programmers and stuff all figured out. And so making something like this accessible to the people by DIY projects, and figuring out, oh, maybe I develop like some kind of an open source controller that People can maybe buy the controller from me and this particular parts list and then assemble it, or whatever, those kinds of projects. That's where our energies could be focused, in trying to collaborate and do DIY stuff for people in a way that would actually help them and actually be able to feed them in this time of, you're only allowed to buy a week's worth of groceries, right? So we personally know a couple families of like 10, as a matter of fact. And so when they were talking about this idea that you were going to need to have permits for gatherings of 10 or more, like they were going to have to figure out which kid they had to boot out of their home, right?
So probably the oldest, I would guess.
Right.
Okay.
What we said was, at first we were like, "Hey, we'll take the baby." Wait, no, that's the wrong decision. Send us
Oh
your
man.
oldest.
Yes.
That's where it's at. So yeah, but it's just ridiculous, right?
Just for the viewers or listeners or whatever, for posterity, never take the baby.
No,
Never take the baby.
too much work. Too much
Yeah.
work. Yeah,
Especially when you have another baby. Don't do that.
yeah, no, yeah. There's two at once is awesome. It's fun. A
Uh,
lot of challenges, but anyway. So those are some of the things that I've considered that would be better for us to be focused on, because there's going to be a lot of people um, who have been greatly affected and just drop kicked out of our economy as we understand it now. And those are the people that we need to figure out how to help in a DIY way. And so I'm very much of the opinion that we need to just, for the most part, unless you're living somewhere like New York where it's already an absolute zoo and people are already living on top of each other in such condensed space that you can't get away from anybody else. If you're living somewhere kind of in much of the middle of the country where you have a little bit of space, you're not kind of within arm's reach of being able to touch the neighbors' houses and stuff. That is a much easier way for you guys to focus on some of these things to help the future, rather than be focused on only the virus itself, right? Because I really strongly feel like that's the stone hitting the water, and the first ripple is the economic stimulus discussion. The third and fourth and fifth ripples are all of the businesses and things that have just been crushed by this whole process, and all of the people that now cannot make ends meet because they instantaneously have zero income and there's no money, and now they literally have to go to the Salvation Army to get food overnight, right? So how do we help those people? This is the kind of project that I suggest as at least a starting point for the discussion of how we begin to fix and rebuild some of the mess that we're going to have to clean up in the wake of all of this.
yeah. Good stuff to think about for sure. So we are coming up on close to an hour now, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're just about a little over an hour, so that was what we wanted to try and hit for time, not because of uh, some magic number, but just about the right length for something like a podcast.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
I guess what's your main takeaway from tonight? What would you want? What's your thesis, right? What is the one thing that you want people to take away from this?
I think I want people to take away that there's a lot of problems that need to be solved now, but the problems are not involving the virus, how to prevent it, how to survive it. I think the problems are how to fix and rebuild in the wake of the shutdown because of the virus. And that's where I'm going to start kind of focusing some of my mental energies on how can I how can I do something with that, because that's maybe not necessarily something that a 3D printer is going to easily solve. But if we're bent on, at least at our particular institution, finding a way that we can contribute with something like that, I really think strongly somewhere like teaching people how they can develop something like a hydroponic home system. That's a that's the kind of thinking that I think we need to be focused on. So that's kind of my main takeaway. How about yourself?
I would say if you're going to get into the world of DIY PPE, you got to be smart about it. Don't just start throwing things together. Do a little bit of research. Make sure that you understand what it is you're trying to stop from getting to you, and then make a plan for stopping it.
Yeah,
Right. So don't fool yourself. Don't think that putting your t-shirt over your face and going into the grocery store. Don't be like the guy that you saw at the grocery store, right? Who's wearing the kitchen gloves and the t-shirt and the shorts, and the mask that's
right.
probably upside down, that doesn't have the nose tab in the right spot, right? Like, don't be that guy. Right? If you're gonna do something like that, use your brain, be smart, and you know, think about what you're doing.
Yeah,
Okay, and the whole social responsibility of the entire situation is something that should be at the forefront of your thoughts here, right?
yeah,
That's where I would leave it.
yeah. I like it. All right. Well,
Next
thanks.
time, what do we think we're gonna
Oh
are we gonna go
man.
after the big fish
I,
next time, or
yeah, I think next time we need to go after
uh,
the elephant in the room, the flat Earth. I think that's the real important stuff. So,
right,
yeah,
right.
I think so long as we
So
can address some of their actual concerns, depending on how we work this. They're such enthusiasts. It might not necessarily be hard to get a hold of some of them to include in the interviews. That would be pretty entertaining. So yeah, it'll be interesting, and we'll see if folks start tuning in with some degree of regularity. I don't know. This is just something entertaining that allows us to kind of blow off a little bit of steam and make sure to keep
right.
a reasonable foundation underneath
I
us.
would say if you made it this far, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, listening, whatever it is you're doing. Um, and we hopefully these will get um, hopefully these will be a little bit less heavy and sometimes, but this is a pretty
yeah.
heavy topic.
This
So
one's a heavy one, but it's good to get some of those
hmm
out of the way early, and we'll see about some of the simulcasting and some of the other stuff. Maybe getting stuff onto Anchor and some of the fancy stuff later. We just wanted to make sure that the mechanics all worked out, and so we'll do some more of these because I think there's a lot of fun topics to handle,
sure.
and yeah, we'll see how it all works out.
All
All
right.
right. Well, everyone have
Solid.
a good evening or morning or whatever time people are rewatching this, and we'll catch up with everybody in the next episode.
The flat Earth conspiracy.
That's right.
10 things they don't want you to know about the flat Earth.
Right. We got to come up with a really good title for that.
We're,
That's for
we're,
sure.
we're shopping it. We're shopping
Yeah, we got to yeah.
it.
Got to think about what that's going to look like. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. All right. Well, I think that should
Cool.
work for a reasonable ending point.
Yep. Have a good night, everybody. See you next.